the founding member, or the founder, sorry, of the Melbourne Art Library. I should put that in the chat for everyone to have a look at too. I've got that. So you can bookmark that for later. Nell is passionate about community engagement with local histories. She's worked across cultural collections in Canberra and Melbourne, and most recently as a general manager at the Castlemaine Art Museum. Nell is a librarian, with a background in art history and theory. Thank you so much, Nell, for joining us today and agreeing to present. Take it away.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for inviting me to present today. I'm zooming in from the Melbourne Art Library on Wurundjeri and Boonwurrung land, and would like to pay respect to the custodians of that country. I will just share my screen. Sorry, just move around the Zoom thing so I can see. Yes, so I'm just going to talk a bit today about the project, which is the Melbourne Art Library. Both kind of started off as a project, I guess, but is now an organisation. So yeah, I'll chat about this and how it relates to the conference theme of winging it. A kind of early introduction for those. Oh, I can't change. Oh, there we go. For those who don't know about the Melbourne Art Library, we began in kind of mid-2020 in the midst of Melbourne lockdowns. And it was a project that was incredibly user-driven in the sense that I was the first user, and I went to Monash Uni to borrow some books, and my student card no longer worked, which was unsurprising, but I was quite kind of taken aback and sad that I couldn't borrow the books that I wanted to read, and I didn't know what to do, and I couldn't think of how I could access these art books. I didn't have much money, I wasn't attached to a university anymore, or a library attached to a collecting institution. So I just kind of ruminated on that a bit and realised that there was a gap for everyday kind of artists, people interested in the arts, art historians, to access books in a kind of open way that isn't necessarily linked to a greater research project or a research outcome, but just kind of for the sake of browsing and general reading. So we began very much with an artist-run initiative mentality rather than coming from the idea of a library more formally, I guess. And I think that's something that stuck with us the whole way through and kind of set the tone for how we interact with other organisations, that we, in a way, are more aligned with artist-run spaces and galleries than libraries. And even when I was first conceptualising what this project could be, I was having quite a lot of conversations with people over Zoom, kind of just cold calling people that I admired, and asking them for their insight and advice and whatnot. And I'd just been working on a research paper about Peter Cripps's work at the IMA in Brisbane, and was really kind of inspired by his kind of DIY strategies and the importance of creating a culture of documenting and sharing practice. So it was those kind of DIY strategies, artist collective movements, that was the basis for this library project, rather than kind of starting with the idea of a library itself. I'm not sure if I actually spoke to any librarians at the time, because I didn't know librarians. My community was artists and students of art history. So those were the people that I was communicating with. So when we began, we were, I guess our very simple idea was to make as many art books as we could make available to people that didn't have access to university libraries predominantly, or whose interests might be beyond that which is catered for at a public library. So collecting books all through donation that weren't held in kind of publicly or widely publicly accessible lending libraries. So we built up a collection. We're at about 3,500 books at the moment, all through donation. And it was still in lockdown, so we were delivering books once a week as a delivery service, because that was allowed under kind of lockdown measures. And then in the end of November 2020, so almost exactly 2 years ago, we got a space in the Nicholas building, which is in the centre of the Melbourne CBD, and moved in all of our books and started operating a library and a reading room. So we're open 4 days a week. And this is the first book plate that we had for our collection. So every year we commission a different artist to design a book plate to affix on the inside cover of the books that enter the collection in that year. And in that first year, it was a local artist, Esther Carlin, who designed that. And she has a wonderful essay that she wrote to accompany the book plate, which you can read through our website. And she was very interested in the idea of gleaning, and that perhaps that's what we were doing with our collecting of books. So we kind of came together in this DIY fashion, but it was very important that we do have a very strong structure behind it all. So despite many lockdowns, we were able to kind of build a rhythm of the library operating quite well, I think, open 4 days a week. So this is an image of the space probably about a year ago, showing what it looked like then. We have some more shelves now and a lot more books. And that's our opening board early last year. So as a team structure, there's 4 coordinators, myself, though I was living in Castlemaine for a lot of it and now in Canberra, Jenna Muir in Brisbane, Fee Wilson, who began in London, now in Melbourne, and Andrew Kopolov, who's in Melbourne. So a pretty spread out team. And then we're all volunteers, and then there's about somewhere between 20 and 30 volunteers who participate in other ways, as well as a board of 8 people. So we have a pretty large team of volunteers who contribute in different ways that they're interested in. And that kind of flexibility of management is important to us, that we were trying, I guess, find a way that we could have as much of a horizontal structure as we could, somewhat similar to artist-run spaces, so that we can learn from different ideas that volunteers bring in and different contributors to the project bring. But the major difference between us and an artist-run space perhaps is the the collection. And that it was really important to me starting out that the collection wasn't just kind of attached to me as an individual person with a project, but that it is a public resource. It is a public collection. So put quite a lot of work into establishing the library as a charity, getting deductible gift recipiency status, and recognition by the ATO as a public library, and making sure that that collection was catalogued at professional standards, so that resource kind of continues on beyond any particular people attached to the project, but as a kind of continuing organisation. And also putting a lot of effort on a board level into developing a strategic plan and those kind of professional practices with a real view for longevity. So kind of balancing a kind of a desire for flexibility with that structure. Because we are a small space, we don't have much funding, we're a team of volunteers, we do have to be very kind of opportunities driven, I guess, or take advantage of opportunities that come our way. And learning, I think, because we have an idea of what we do and who we are, which is really to provide access to specialised art and design resources for everybody that is interested in the arts. We know when to say yes and no to opportunities and invitations, but working with these kind of invitations, I guess, and in a really collaborative way with other arts organisations, has allowed us to build a really strong network of collaborators. There's definitely a financial imperative there as well, which is that we can share resources when putting on events and that kind of thing. And also really interesting ideas. We've collaborated on quite a few kind of architecture and design themed events and programs, which has kind of taken some of our collection and thinking in that way, when I come from a visual arts background and didn't necessarily expect that when we started. So it's nice to have those people and relationships that come in and kind of show us a new way of thinking about art and design and what we can do as a library. So I'll just mention a few of the projects that we have worked on, which are definitely more aligned with other arts organisations than with libraries. In 2021, we participated with Melbourne Design Week and Melbourne Art Book Fair on a series of artist-led talks and design-led talks. We were invited to collaborate with ACCA, the Australian Centre for Contemporary Art, for their summer exhibition last year, Who's Afraid of Public Space, and worked with Caliper Journal, who are actually the people that were pictured in the previous slide, to work on the design of, well, they designed the reading room, and we kind of talked through that with them and assisted them and loaned books to that collection. So it was for 3 months at ACCA, there was this public reading room with art and design resources. We also programmed into that space 4 workshops and 3 forums. So that was a really interesting project to kind of be involved with that contemporary art community. We've had projects with M Pavilion, and a current virtual exchange we've been working on has been through Blindside, which is a gallery also in the Nicholas Building, and an exchange with a gallery in Aotearoa in New Zealand called the Physics Room. And we have a public symposium online on Monday, if anyone's interested to listen in to hear a bit about that. We also have upcoming events with Shepparton Art Museum and with a gallery in Metropolitan Melbourne. We'll have an exhibition next year. So it's very exciting, I guess, when these different invitations to collaborate with places come up, because for us it's, we kind of try and be porous, I guess, as an organisation, and that we can kind of come from an idea of, well, what we can contribute to these relationships is this idea of a library as almost kind of a glue or something like that within this arts ecology or a non-competitive space where we're sharing information, we're kind of promoting the exchange of knowledge, and can link these different exhibition spaces. And we've also had programs come from internal ideas generation, which has been a really lovely thing. Different volunteers joining the project and spearheading projects. For example, Liam Vaughan, who's an artist and librarian, has been developing an archive of ephemera related to artist-run projects in Melbourne. And Savannah Smith, previous volunteer, ran a reading group. So that's been lovely. And with, kind of central to the idea of what the Melbourne Art Library is the artist. And we are constantly kind of user-driven, I guess. And that was both beginning with that idea of access, and that we want a library where books are accessible by all artists, not only artists, but all interested in the arts, but also thinking a lot about the artist as maker and maker of published matter, printed matter, and collecting that as well. And it's really wonderful when a lot of artists in Melbourne come in to the library and kind of donate their book to the collection. And we saw that as a different form of access. But also thinking about other ways that we can incorporate artists into the collection and how we function. So as I mentioned before, we have an annual book plate commission. So this was this year's bookplate designed by Peter Tyndall, which I really love. And another project or program that we have are artists in residence. So we've had 2 residencies this past year, Jakali Romanis and Daniel Janach, and we have another 2 in the new year. So this is an excerpt of the outcome that Jakali worked on while she was with us. So it's a pretty kind of broad program. We invite artists to spend 2 months in the library. We support them as best we can through access to the space, to the collection, conversations with volunteers, with those involved with the project that know a lot about the collection, librarianship. There's also an artist fee, and we are just interested really to learn how can a library support artists, and the outcomes that we kind of, we don't necessarily want an outcome that is an artwork or kind of an easily defined project. We'd be really happy if at the end of the residencies the artists print out notes that they've made, or they suggest a different policy or way that the library could function, or yeah, it can really be anything. We want to learn from the artists how could you make use of a library, and yeah, how can we better support that. So what Jakali did when she was with us was she was a First Nations woman, an artist researcher, and was very interested in the role that libraries play as gatekeepers of information, and the idea of weeding, and how that's quite particular to libraries as collecting institutions, and was looking quite critically at texts in the collection that made reference to First Nations art, and introduced this practice of annotating texts using tracing paper, that it's not disposing of a text that is outdated, is incorrect, is offensive or racist, is not necessarily the way to go, but we can update information. And that doesn't have to just relate to this subject matter, but could be on all kinds of things, even just to write in the margins, if you like this artist, you might like this, or something like that. And this was an example. This is just a photo of one of the workshops that we had at ACCA about collaboratively designing a call number system for the library. And central, or what has emerged over the last 2 years of this project, is that we started very much thinking about books, users and books, and that kind of exchange. But now that our library, our reading room functions 4 days a week, we have our lending collection, we're thinking a lot more about exchange of information in a non-tangible, intangible way, that a conversation, a workshop, providing that space for conversation and exchange is as important, if not more important, especially when getting an exhibition in Melbourne, getting representation can be so competitive. Actually providing a space where you can chat with your peers or chat to artists that kind of outside your everyday sphere is really important. So we try and facilitate that through things like reading groups, and also through forums and other kind of spoken events, as I mentioned earlier. So you can listen to these podcasts through our website. And in the coming year, we have, I think, 5 more forums in this distribution series coming up, and we'll have monthly artist-led reading groups as well. So we emerged very much from a specific need within, from the perspective of like artists and makers and art historians, rather than from the view of a librarian, even though I am a librarian. And so that kind of artist-run mentality has been central to the project. And throughout, over the last 2 years, there's been a real need to kind of temper that DIY kind of attitude, and the importance of flexibility in terms of adapting to what our community and what our users need, and being able to experiment in that way, but also having really strong professional practices and structure for the longevity of that collection, and almost also thinking about librarianship as a form of social practice. But yeah, thinking about winging it a lot of what we've been doing is winging it for lack of resources, for generally, there's not that many people involved with the library that have librarianship skills, so, but that is changing. But putting these structures in place so that others don't have to wing it, that we can have this resource available to artists so that it is more sustainable and it is more feasible for someone to have an artistic career, to participate in artistic practice, whether they kind of call themselves an artist and have that identity in practice, or if it's someone that is just interested in the arts. Yeah, so structure so that others don't have to wing it as much, I guess. Yeah, so I'll leave it there. You're very welcome to come and visit us. The details are there.